Fanalysis combines the data made popular in fantasy football with the latest sports betting trends to find you the sharpest angles. Jared Smith is on assignment this week, so he left us in good hands. Tim Murray joins us, the co-host of VSiN Primetime. You can catch weeknights from 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern and the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast. Tim, good to have you in the show, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you said left in good hands. We'll see. You can tell me whether or not in the next half hour or so. But Jared's a good friend. I know he's as you said, on assignment this weekend. So I'll do my best to divvy out some winners and won't try to act too foolish.
Well, the scorecard comes on Sunday, so we'll decide that on Sunday whether or not it was good lines. But let's take a look at the big plays that you're looking at this week. The Jags and the Lions game is interesting because both teams have lost a lot of close games. However, Jacksonville proved that they can close out a game with that two-point conversion against Baltimore this last week. Does that game influence your decision this week at all?
I really like to study the market, and that's kind of the way that I've gone about betting the majority of my betting career, so to speak. So I just like to look at how we're moving here. And, especially early on in the week, it's hard to determine exactly where the betting public is because a lot of people viewing right now are going to throw their, $20, $40 bets on the weekend, which I totally recognize. But I like to see kind of how the line moves, and you've seen line movement here in favor of the Jacksonville Jaguars, despite the fact that BetMGM was reporting earlier today that 73% of the bets were coming in on the Detroit Lions. Detroit's been a fascinating case this year because they had Hard Knocks and everyone kind of loved Dan Campbell and all the narratives behind them, and they're one of the most popular bets to win their division this year, and obviously it hasn't worked out as well as they would hope, being 4-7. Jacksonville, similar circumstance, sitting at 4-7 as well. I think bettors normally like to see, okay, what did they do last? And both of these teams, despite the Lions losing and the Jaguars winning, I think overall played pretty well and surprised some folks. As you mentioned, the Jaguars getting that come-from-behind victory over the Baltimore Ravens, which seems to be a trend, unfortunately, for my home state's team there in the Baltimore Ravens, blowing double-digit leads. But then I feel like a lot of people want this Detroit Lions team to have success. So I hate to fade the public. Well, that's not true. I actually love to fade the public. But I do think this is a circumstance where you look towards maybe riding that momentum of the Jacksonville Jaguars. The line moved from them being an underdog to a slight favorite. So I think the Jaguars keep it rolling here. And I loved what I saw from Trevor Lawrence last week. We've kind of been waiting for him to make that big step as a big-time quarterback. And, to go up 29 of 37, 3 touchdowns, lead a come-from-behind victory, I'm going to try to ride that momentum here with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So even though they're a road favorite, which isn't something I normally love to back, I'm going to trust the market here and go with the Jaguars.
So 73% of the tickets are on the Lions, but the late money will usually flip that script completely different, especially since Doug Peterson just said that Travis Etienne is good to go. However, when you look at some of the stats here, if you take a deep dive into the stats, over the last 3 seasons, on 10 days rest, the Lions are 4-1. Dan Campbell, seems to be able to build this team, I guess, get into the hearts and minds of this Lions team. Does Campbell's success in being able to get that locker room to come together scare anybody that's trying to lay money against him?
Well, and I think, too, kind of to your point, Dan Campbell has really thrived. And you saw it last year, the way that this team responded down the stretch. Despite the failures in the win-loss column, as a bettor, Detroit was one of the most profitable teams in the league last year. And overall, under Dan Campbell, the Lions are 18-10 against the spread as an underdog and 9-3 against the spread as a home underdog. So, yes, certainly I'm going against that trend, which doesn't make you feel warm and cozy inside, but it's a very small number. If this was a bigger number, I would kind of be looking towards backing the home team here. But essentially what you're looking at, and this might flip-flop come Sunday depending on, where some money comes in, but seeing this Lions team as a very short home underdog doesn't really worry me. But if this were a situation where, they're facing the Green Bay Packers, a team that they already beat this year, or, the Vikings, someone like that, where they might be a more significant home underdog, then I would absolutely look to jump into the side of the Lions. And I always think it is kind of fascinating. And this has been something that I've kind of relied on over the years is I trust the guys behind the counter more than I trust myself. They do this for a living. They got to keep the electricity on there in those expensive sports books. And right now that a 4-7 Jaguars team is a road favorite, isn't that telling you something? It always kind of tells a story. I always say that, and you can look at different spreads. I always say the point spread can tell a story in and of itself. And I think the fact that a 4-7 Jaguars team is a road favorite, it's kind of telling you something here, that the books are maybe a little bit more confident in what to expect from the Jaguars on Sunday.
Well, and you have to kind of trust your eyes on what you see, because Trevor Lawrence is becoming a lot more accurate and getting over the hump of being able to pull off a comeback and a 2-point conversion at the end of a game. There is a mental barrier that some players need to overcome. And if you see that guy overcoming that barrier, then I can completely understand wanting to be on that side. The Chargers are 1-point dogs in Vegas against the Raiders. The Raiders have found their offensive legs recently. Is that a trend you expect to continue?
I do. And this is another circumstance where, look, I don't blindly bet line moves. That would be not a profitable endeavor. You got to pick your spots. But I found it very telling on Thursday afternoon when the Raiders were an underdog at home, albeit a short one, around 2 points, and they flipped to a favorite at most sports books across the country. And that was very interesting to see, that flip from Chargers -2 to Raiders becoming a 1-point favorite. Look, this is a Raiders team that preseason might have been one of the more overrated teams in the league, right? They go out to get Devontae Adams, the expectation of Darren Waller being a huge asset, Hunter Renfrow, et cetera, with Derek Carr. And obviously they have delivered here, especially in Las Vegas, a town that was expecting them to have a big year. Their win total was around 8.5, and it certainly doesn't feel like that's going to come home here for the Raiders. But like you mentioned, I do feel like you're starting to find something here with this Raiders team. And these last couple weeks for the Las Vegas Raiders have impressed. And look, the Chargers got their win last week against the Arizona Cardinals. You mentioned the 2-point conversion, for the Jaguars. They went for 2. Ultimately get that victory against the Arizona Cardinals. But, remember, the Chargers were around a 4.5-point underdog, or 4.5-point favorite, I beg your pardon. And then the market bet against them in that spot last week, and they did not cover. They won the game, but did not cover. So I'm looking for this Raiders team, and I know that Josh Jacobs was a little bit banged up, after the performance he had last week. But I do anticipate this Raiders team to kind of keep this momentum going. Obviously, back-to-back overtime wins, small margin there for the Raiders. But, both those games coming on the road. And I think the win last week over the Seattle Seahawks, a team that certainly has over-exceeded everybody's expectations, the way that they played the Raiders, to beat the Seattle Seahawks in that fashion and to go into overtime, and you get the massive run from Josh Jacobs. I do anticipate the Raiders to keep this train rolling. And, last year they had success. Remember, last year, final game of the regular season, it was Raiders-Chargers, one of the more electric games we had all last regular season. Raiders got it done. I think they get it done again on Sunday at home against the Chargers.
Okay, so the Chargers right now are about as healthy as they've been in at least a month here. However, Derek Carr calling out his team's heart has that locker room maybe as healthy as that Raiders locker room has been all year. Do either of those bear any influence on this game, you think?
Well, and also keep in mind that Mike Williams has been an absentee at practice here. So he's been dealing with injuries, as you mentioned. This team in Los Angeles has been getting healthier, but Mike Williams dealing with some injuries. So we'll see if he's available come Sunday afternoon. But yeah, Derek Carr is a fascinating case because, he's a guy that everybody that seems to speak of Derek Carr speaks incredibly highly of him, but he has these ebbs and flows, and he wears his, emotions on his sleeve, so to speak. But he does seem like a leader that is incredibly well respected. I know Davante Adams was calling him out a couple weeks ago, and sometimes I go back and forth with, all right, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And we know the relationship between Davante Adams and Derek Carr. Everybody reminded us about 1,000 times, hey, they went to college together. So we know maybe there's a little more ebb and flow with this relationship. Maybe Davante Adams is capable of calling out Derek Carr. He could be the type of guy that responds to that type of criticism, and we've seen that the past couple of weeks. So it was a big spot. Look, I don't think the Raiders are headed to the playoffs this year, sitting at 4-7, through 11 weeks of the season. However, an opportunity to come back home after those back-to-back wins, and then you look at the last time they were at home. I mean, they embarrassed themselves. They lost to Jeff Saturday in his debut when everyone was laughing at the Colts, and they came out and the Colts beat them. And it really was, I thought a rather impressive performance by the Indianapolis Colts. So I think an opportunity to return home after back-to-back wins when they were 2-7. I mean, crazy to think that the Raiders were 2-7 at one point. So we'll see if they can kind of keep that rolling. And like I said, what triggered me probably the most was that influential money moving this line from Raiders as a short home dog to Raiders as right now a very slight favorite.
Well, let me tell you something. If you've been in the locker rooms, you know that players will call one another out. That happens in every locker room. But I guarantee if that would have happened in New York, it'd be back page. But in Vegas, it's it's a little less of a qualifier in the media, at least. All right, so a teaser allows you to move the line in 6 points in one direction or another, one to obviously favor you. You're moving the Giants through two key numbers now to 7.5 against Washington, and the Bengals you move to 8.5 against the Chiefs. What interests you here?
So I want to start with the Giants game, and this is probably the leg that I like most about teasers. And if people are new to betting and are unfamiliar with teasers, as you alluded to, it gives you the ability to move with 6 points one way or the other. So you can either move a favorite down 6 points or move an underdog up 6 points. And I'll tell you why the Giants are so appealing when it comes to a teaser leg this week. First off, it's a division game against the Washington Commanders. But look at the total. The total right now is 40.5. That is the lowest total on the board. No matter where you bet, and I'll just, PSA, look around. The standard juice that you have to pay the house on a teaser should be -120. You can find that. Do not bet higher than -120. Don't get lazy. Don't go -125 because it's convenient over the long term. Make sure you're betting those -120 teasers. And look, I'll say this here real quickly about teasers. Books have adjusted over the years, and that means books are not doing well, right? They don't want these to be even money, -110, which is your standard juice when it comes to a bet. They have to add a little bit more money on their side, a little more protection. So it tells you that over time that teasers kind of have worked in the favor of bettors. So back to the Giants and why it's so appealing. It's -120 no matter what the total is. So just do your normal math. If a total is 40.5 and then another game's total is 50.5, well, guess what? The points are more valuable in a game like the Giants and the Commanders. So that's why the Giants are so intriguing to me. So as you alluded to, key numbers, right? 3, 7, so many games land on those in the NFL. And you've got the Giants as an underdog at home. So we get to push that up through the 3, through the 7. So that's why the Giants are very appealing to me. Also, when it comes to unders in divisional games, they've been very fruitful. You saw it on Thursday night, divisional game, Buffalo, New England. What happened? Under. This total sitting at 40.5. Unders this year, 34, 18, and 3, I believe is the number to the under, or 34, 18, and 1, I beg your pardon, to the under in divisional games. And I kind of expect that to be the typical scenario come Sunday afternoon at MetLife Stadium. So the Giants are 1. Now, I'm going to contradict myself here a little bit with this Bengals game because I mentioned the low total in the Giants game, and now we've got a very high total for NFL purposes for the Bengals and the Chiefs. I just really like what I'm seeing right now from the Cincinnati Bengals team. They're expected to get Jamar Chase back. They're playing better football. Very, very impressive performance last week against the Tennessee Titans. And I like more so, and this is just my personal preference, to tease up dogs as opposed to teasing down favorites. Teasing down favorites, a lot of people like to do that, whether a 7.5-point favorite down to 1.5. I like to tease up dogs, especially home dogs. So in this particular teaser, we've got a home dog in Cincinnati, a home dog in the Giants, both now north of a touchdown underdog. So that's why I'm rolling with those two as my teaser this weekend.
So speaking of the Chiefs, I mean, they've won 5 straight. They've also become a little bit of a comeback team because the last 6 times they've trailed at the half, they've come back to win their game. Is that why it's important to move that line to kind of 8.5 then?
Anytime we're going against Patrick Mahomes, it's not a really enjoyable endeavor.
You're sweating it the entire time, man. You're rooting against points at this point.
It was like, a couple of years ago, I felt like Russell Wilson was my arch nemesis, betting against him. You never felt safe no matter what the score was. And that kind of feels like the case right now with Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is the favorite to win the MVP in the NFL at every book across the country, and rightfully so. I think ultimately he does win it. And I think as of right now, Kansas City, at this moment in time, I believe they're the best team in the NFL. But they're going to Cincinnati, a place that, let's just be honest, hasn't been that fruitful for them, right? Last year, they went to Cincinnati late in the season as I believe, around a 5-point favorite. They lost that game outright, blew a lead there, lost again to Cincinnati, in the playoffs. And what's interesting is that the common thread or narrative, however you want to define it this week, is it's revenge time for Kansas City. They're not going to lose to Cincinnati again. It's possible, but I just like to look at betting numbers, right? And those early spreads. DraftKings was reporting 90% of the money and 82% of tickets on Kansas City. But yet the line really hasn't moved all that much. So what type of money is coming in? What do the books really think of this game? So I lean towards Cincinnati as a favorite, as a slight underdog. But if I get that extra cushion sitting at, over a touchdown, just like what I've seen lately from Joe Burrow in this squad. So I think this is going to be one of the better games of the weekend, maybe the best game of the weekend. It feels like kind of a shootout instant classic. And if we can keep it under a touchdown, we're going to hopefully cash a ticket.
I think that's a really interesting read because we do like to read what the line movement does and how the books respond to that. When you have that many tickets, that much money on one side, and the book hasn't changed at all, that is a note that you have to take advantage of. All right, that's how Tim values his best bets of the week. Make sure you check out our other segment where he focuses on the Jets and the Giants as well. For Tim Murray of VSiN, I'm Steve Overmyer. This is Fanalysis.